Welcome to the newest episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. Today's guest is an incredibly talented singer-songwriter, producer, engineer, and multi-instrumentalist based in Athens, Georgia. He's worked with many Athens bands that I've interviewed before, like Heffner, Low Talker, and Wander Wild. Before we get the episode started, please make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And don't forget to follow me at Parker Whirling and at On That Note _podcast on Instagram. And on that note, please welcome Alec Stanley. Sitting here with Alec Stanley, a singer-songwriter, producer, engineer, and multi-instrumentalist based in Athens, Georgia. When I first heard about you, it seemed like you were the everyman of Athens. That was the first thing I thought, because you're involved in so many projects in so many different bands and groups in Athens. Some I've already interviewed, like Wander Wild and Low Talker, you play guitar and keys for, as well as producing and engineering the debut album by Heffner, who had just released their interview. And on top of that, some others being Monsoon from Athens and Secondhand Sound's debut album, which I listened to today. And it's fascinating that you have so many different projects you work on, including your own stuff that we will be getting into in a little bit. But I guess my first question here is, how did you find yourself getting involved in all these opportunities? Like, did it start with one thing and then it branched into a lot of things, or did you kind of fall into it? Like, how did this all come about?
Well, I very much sought it out when I moved to Athens. I grew up playing in bands since I was in high school, touring and playing shows, but I really found myself gravitating towards making records. That's what I really, really enjoy. The songwriting process of being in the band while you're creating something new. And I really love the process of recording that and kind of polishing it and getting it to the final recorded process, thing. So when I first moved to Athens, I pretty much set my sights on, playing with as many people as possible. I came from a town with a really good music scene that kind of dwindled out after a while. So moving to Athens, I was definitely seeking to fill that void, and I found it, definitely. The scene was pretty strong when I first moved to town, and started to die off a little bit as bands, getting older, moving away. Everyone moves to Atlanta, you know how it goes. So it took a while to get started, but I was just playing in a couple bands and really just going to a lot of different shows. And actually, one of the big ways I really got into producing, there's a producer engineer in town named Vandenberg, and he's one of my favorite people, one of my best friends. But I was actually playing a show at a bar in Athens with the band that I was playing with at the time called Mighty, and there was like 4 people there, and Drew was one of those people, and my wife was actually there, one of the 4 people there, and they struck up a conversation, and she started talking to him about how, I really liked playing in bands, and I really liked touring, but what I really wanted to do was produce records. That's really where my interest was, and after the show, he came straight up to me and introduced himself, and we started getting lunch, and he, started giving me a lot of advice, and we became very, very good friends over the past, 4 or 5 years. But I remember, talking to him about, wanting to be a producer. And I was playing in bands and, recording records as a player, but I wasn't producing them. And, I would say, I'm about to do this, or I'm about to do this record, or I'm about to do that record. And he just interrupted me, and he was like, "You're always about to do something. Why don't you just do something?" He's like, no one comes around and, taps you with a magic wand and says you're a producer now. He's like, if you produce something, then you're a producer. So find a band that you like, that you think you can help, and that thinks that you're good and knows your work, and convince them to let you produce their record. So that's what I did. I found, 4 or 5 different artists that I really, really believed in, and, went fishing and started kind of baiting the line. And it sometimes takes, bands are on about a 2.5 year cycle, starting to write a record by the time it gets recorded. So some of these bands like Monsoon and Heffner, I was talking to them, 2.5 years before we started making their record, just being like, I'm making your record. You don't have a choice. There's not really somebody that's going to love these songs the way that I do. Like, I know that I'm the right fit for this. And I think that works to my benefit is if I believe that I can be a helpful part of a creative process, I don't really have a problem inserting myself into someone's creativity. So that's really how I got started. And then Athens just is so small that once you start doing it, and once you make yourself available and show up for people, that goes a long way. And if you're passionate about someone's art, it really turns an artist on to get feedback from someone who's not blowing smoke, but is really, trying to pull the best out of their songs and really jumping into that universe with them and being like, okay, yes, that's great. This isn't that great yet. This is really good. Let's take a left turn. Let's take a right turn. It's really fun to have that kind of person to bounce stuff off with. So I think that's really how I kind of got into the groove in Athens and in the Southeast.
Wow, that's really interesting that Drew had that conversation with you saying, just do it. Like, nobody's going to go ahead and tell you, all right, here's your producer badge. Like, you're officially a producer. You just have to make it happen. Was that feeling of imposter syndrome maybe, did that go away after the first album? Do you still feel like maybe at times it creeps in? Like, how did you deal with that at first?
I definitely feel like that I had a bit of that in the beginning, especially with engineering. I still have that with engineering. I have friends that have been engineering for 25 years. Drew's been doing it since he was 17. I have a good friend that also lives in Athens. His name's Jason Kingsland. He's been doing it for about 20 years or so. And these are the guys that I tell people they should have engineer their records. These are the people that are engineer producers that can do both very well. I came to engineering for a means to an end, just because I was the one that knew the most about Pro Tools and microphones in the room. And sometimes, bands didn't have a budget to pay someone, and I wanted to produce it. So therefore I was like, well, I'll just do both of them. So I think for me, the imposter syndrome, the self-doubt comes for the engineering side, just because I technically barely know what's going on. During a session that I'm engineering, I oftentimes, it takes up most of my brain power making sure the ship stays afloat, especially in like a live tracking situation where you've got like 24 inputs and you're trying to make sure that all the wheels keep spinning. So I definitely feel that in that regard. And then as far as producing goes, I just have been playing music for so long and with so many different bands that I just really worked on my communication aspect, and that helps that side of things. Like, if I am articulating my ideas correctly, if I'm listening intently, and if I'm balancing the vibe between band dynamics, then I'm doing my job. So I'll say that really helps me with the producing side of things, just being a conduit of the general vibe, because a lot of times you don't have to say something. A lot of times if you just wait, someone else will say your idea. You don't have to be driving the ship. You don't have to be telling people what to do. You just are there to help embellish what they're there to do. So yeah, I think that has led me, for the engineering side, has just led me to desire to work with people that are really good engineers, and so I can just do my thing. and play and produce and help arrange and write, and not really have to worry too much about the technical aspect. And so I really like pairing up with really talented engineer producers who they're a lot more talented and knowledgeable with the recording side of things.
So in regards to a couple of the guys you mentioned, Jason Kingsland and Drew Vandenberg, both very talented engineer producers. They do both. To you, what do you think makes them such talented engineer producers? Like, what do you think is a key quality in somebody who is a very top of the line engineer and producer?
I think it's a couple things. It's attention to detail, and it's the experience factor, but it's also the love for the art of recording. I think that both of those guys could nerd out about different, technical aspects of recording, and they really understand it in a way that they fully grasp the concept of recording and how everything works, and they really, really are interested in that. And like I said earlier, like for me, the engineering side was always just because I kind of knew just a little bit more than someone else in the room. And so my focus was always like the songs and playing instruments. And so I didn't really dedicate the time that it takes to learn the knowledge and the skill. And so I think that with Jason and Drew in particular, what really sets them apart is they have really unique creative ideas. They're really tapped into what's going on in the recording process, but also they have the knowledge to pair with that of like what's going on with phase and with everything, and with the combined with the years of experience of knowing that they should use this preamp and they should set this compressor this way, or this thing's going to sound like this. I think those things are what really set them apart, in conjunction with their ridiculous creativity,
Yeah, it seems like it's totally both an art and a science. And
Exactly.
I certainly know a lot less about the science of it. I know what I think sounds good and what interesting ideas I could come up with creatively, but when it comes to let's use this microphone instead of that one, or a preamp, I barely even knew what a preamp was until a couple of years ago. So
I still don't know what it does. I don't know.
I don't know. It's so weird. Or like, a reason why you might, like, I didn't know what phase was until literally, I think 2 weeks ago when we were recording drums. They were like, oh, we got to make sure it's out of phase. I'm like, I always hear that, and I really don't know what it means. But now I know, and it's like a gradual process of figuring these things out as you go. Do you have in your mind or your experiences something that you learned that has been so key, so critical for the way you produce people's albums now?
Yes, I think that the main thing that I've learned is to listen and to be quiet. Because you really aren't, if you're there as a producer, you really aren't there to run the show, even though you are in charge of making sure the session's running in a timely manner. You're in charge of, not in charge, it's your role to balance everyone's energy and make sure that everyone, like you're passing around the proverbial talking stick, you're there to really be decisive in what needs to cut through all the chatter, right? Because if you have an engineer and a producer and 5 people in a band, that's 7 people in a room. And so what I've learned that really helps me is to really listen, to be fully present, and to, as much as possible, let the ego get out of the process. Because anytime the ego is inserted in a creative process, the creative process suffers. So for me, the biggest takeaway has been, doing the work on myself outside of the studio and outside of the recording process or being in a band, to really just be present with the process and remove myself, so to speak. That's been the biggest help. And when something monumental happens is when you have an idea and you know that it's right for the song, and 4 people in the band are not on that. So you can either voice your opinion in the moment that you think it and battle 4 people in the band, or you can wait 30 seconds and someone in the band says, we shouldn't do this, we should do this. And it's the idea that's in your head, and therefore you didn't create any friction. It's just naturally played out to be what it should be. And most of the time, that's what happens, you know. Things end up right without you kind of making them so.
Yeah. I've found that when working with people who I always make sure are more talented than me, that when I have something that I want to do, and what's kind of interesting is when you produce bands, you have 5 people maybe that all could have an equally valid opinion about why their band's music should sound like this. For me, it's really like just my name, so I don't have a band that has to chime in, but I do want to hear the opinions of like the producer, the engineer, the session musicians that are in there. And I've found that if I really want something, it's valid to say it and say this is what I want, but it's just as valuable, if not more, to listen to what everybody else thinks, because even if it's not exactly what I wanted, they may suggest something based on my thing I just said that's even better. And that's why you should always try everything. I mean, if time is permitting that, right? If you have a time crunch, then maybe stick what you think is going to be what's going to work. But if you have the time, you should try everything, because you never really know what idea is going to lead to the next one.
Yeah, it's like the idea of improv. You know, it's yes-anding.
Right.
I've been in so many creative processes where someone says no. Someone proposes an idea and someone says no. And that's just not really conducive to a good final product. You know, you'll get there, you'll get a mastered song, right? You'll get it out, but it's like the whole point of the process is to try. You know, there's a lot of that I learned through working with Wanderwild in particular, because there's 5 people in that project, and now Tommy Troutwine's also part of that project, so 6 people who all write songs, who all are very, very competent musicians, who all play multiple instruments. And so we had to learn to just try everyone's idea, even though you'd say an idea and everyone would have their own opinion immediately, we would just try it. And so some songs would turn out to where, you know, Matt would play bass for 45 seconds and then he'd run out of ideas, and then he'd hand the bass off to Taylor, and Taylor would play for 30 seconds. And then I'd say, I have an idea, give me the bass. And since we have such a good dynamic and such a strong respect for each other in a friendship, you just hand over the bass. You know, if someone says, give me that, you're not going to be like, well, I'm going to sit here for 2 hours and try to figure this out. It's like, no, dude, like, if you've got an idea, speak up. And I think that kind of creative process is what really gets me going, is when everyone's just like spitballing and throwing things out, and then you walk away with this thing that you're blown away by, because you let go of the initial idea. You know, that can be hard for some songwriters to do, especially songwriters that are competent producers. They go in with a strong idea of what they want, and a lot of times in my opinion, I've seen a song suffer for that reason. You know, we didn't go down this caveat of making this really cool tape loop because they said no before they even spent 45 minutes hearing it, you know? So I think that really goes back to the dissolving of the ego in the creative process. If you think that you know what it's going to be by the end of it, then you probably do, you know? But if you're open to it changing and molding, then you'll probably get back something at the end of the recording process that you are just flabbergasted by how cool it sounds, you know?
Yeah, and that is, to me, the best part of all of it. Usually a question I ask is, what's your favorite part of the creation process? And that's always a really cool thing to hear from the people I'm interviewing. And I think there's many favorite parts for me, and they're always like tiny little moments. But I'd say one of them that happens almost every time I record a song, especially if it's with other producers, is that there's that moment listening back to it at the end where you think about what where it started, the seed of what that song was, and now witnessing this total growth that you never could have imagined it being, and you never probably could have done without the help of these other talented individuals. And you have to trust them, and they have to trust you as well. It has to be a circle of good intentions and energy, and you never know what amazing product you could get out at the end of it. Have there been specific moments like that for you that come to mind right now? Certain songs or certain projects you've done with people that really make you think, "Wow, I can't believe it turned out like this."
Yeah, I think the Low Talker record is the big kicker for me because, Andy is like definitely the best songwriter I've met. He just really understands how to write a song, and he really understands how to say what he's trying to say in a way that gets in your head. And it's not only gets in your head, but it gets stuck in your head and you sing it, and then every time you sing it, you understand something different about what he's trying to say. And so I think that making that record really cracked open a whole new level of being as a creative individual for me, at least in my own mind, how I view myself, being able to listen back to something that you're that in love with and that proud of, to me was a really defining moment in my career. I have a tattoo on my right hand of one of the songs that we did for that record that didn't make the record, because I remember sitting at the piano tracking the song, just playing block chords, nothing crazy. I'm just adding little textures in there. And I just remember feeling like, this is it. It's everything that I spent my entire childhood wanting is happening. I am finally in the thing with what's happening in a way that really felt completely immersive and completely just like out of body. It was a really surreal experience, especially because I had been a fan of Andy's music for so long, and his brother Zach and Rhett, who plays in Low Talker as well. They had a band for a long time that I liked, for 6 or 7 years. So that was probably one of those definitely defining moments where, we were out in LA making a record. I'm playing piano, looking at the Hollywood Hills, and, I'm looking across the street at Blake Mills' house, and then 2 houses down is David Lynch's house, and it's like, David Lynch is my favorite filmmaker, and so it was just one of those all-encompassing things that felt like your head's inside of a washing machine, and you're just like, how is this my life right now, and for me, that's kind of, there's so many experiences like that making records, but that is a big one that definitely felt like a level up,
Wow, that's beautiful. It is crazy how sometimes you're just so present in the moment, and it's like everything hits at once. Now you like realize, wow, all this work has paid off. I'm literally living my dream. And if you're not present, you might miss those moments, and they happen all the time. Sometimes it doesn't really line up for you. That's awesome that you got to really experience that. I think part of it, maybe being in a new environment, you're like so conscious of what's going on. And then on top of that, you're doing something that you love with people that you love. And then this starstruckness of being like right next to Blake Mills and David Lynch. I've just gotten into Blake Mills, actually, which is funny that you bring him up. He's insane. He's like so talented.
He's a freak. Yeah, our producer that did the Low Talker record, his name's Kevin Ratterman, and I would sit out on the porch and at the end of the day and smoke a cigarette and drink mezcal and just like look at the sunset, and I would see this Tesla pull into a garage every single night, and he would just sit there for like an hour, okay? And I'm like, he's got to be like listening to mixes or something. This has got to be, what is this person doing? Like, their car's on, they pull into their garage and they sit there for an hour before they cut their car off and go inside. And I was like, I pointed to the house. I was like, Kevin, does that guy make music? And he just kind of chuckled. He's like, that's fucking Blake Mills, dude. I was like, so yeah, a little bit, I guess he makes music.
Yeah, he dabbles.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
It was that was a really, really fun record to make.
Dude, I bet that's such a cool experience. When I lived in LA for about 5.5 years, and my last like month there, I was going to this studio that I've been going to for like a couple of years. Shout out to New Beat Fund. They have a studio in at Sound City Studios in Van Nuys, and they became close friends. And I'd basically bring songs to them, and they would spruce it up and make it sound a lot better. And the last time I was there, one of the guys came in and he's like, "Oh, it looks like Pino's outside. They're doing a photo shoot or something." And it took me a second. And I was like, "It's not Pino Palladino. Why would it be?" And then I was like, "Wait a second. I'm at like a world-class recording studio. Why couldn't it be him?" So I was like, "Is that you mean Pino Palladino?" They're like, "Yeah, you know him." I'm like, "I don't not personally know." And they're like, "Oh yeah, he's out there. He's like smoking a cigarette right now." I'm like, I think I gotta go get something from my car, guys. I'll be right back. And I walked out there, and I was too nervous to say anything, but he like gave me the nod, like waved to me, and I gave him the nod back and like freaked out inside. And then I learned later that he was there because him and Blake Mills were doing their Notes with Attachments album. So what's even crazier is like I didn't know Blake Mills at the time, but we were in the same space at the same time. And now I'm like, holy shit, not only was it Pino who was there, but Blake Mills, who I now love, was there. I just didn't happen to see him in the actual parking lot,
Yeah, it's really trippy when stuff like that starts to happen, where you start to like, where it's almost like it folds in on itself for a little moment, and you realize like just how accessible your dreams are. They're just like when moments like that happen, it's a really encouraging to see like, okay, I definitely am in the right place, doing the right thing, and I just keep on doing it.
Absolutely. It's important to take in those moments. One specific question I have for you, just because I've said it so many times. I met with Taylor from Heffner last week, and he's probably annoyed by it, but I keep saying how much I love Up to Speed. That's really one of my favorite songs I've heard in a long time. And
it's a great song.
Yeah, I still listen to it like every day. So I just wanted to ask you about the recording process behind that, and if there were any standout moments, any difficulties that you guys had going into it throughout the process. How was that song shaped once you got into the recording studio?
Well, it's pretty crazy because, Heffner is one of those bands that I was pretty deeply invested in since the formation of, and Taylor and Reagan are like my brothers. They really are two of my closest friends. But that song in particular, I was like, I told Taylor immediately when I heard it, I'm like, Matt needs to do this song. Matt, being Matt Martin from Wanderwild, and he was my studio partner at the time. I was like, Matt really needs to do this song because this is his wheelhouse. He's going to knock this out of the park. And so I think that one of the things that I observed during that process that was really cool is that, the production, the way that Matt approached the production of that song was really cool. The drums in the verse of that song, like those syncopated drum parts, are one-hit samples that Matt programmed.
Wow.
So basically he had Will just do one hits on the mic'd up kit in the studio, and then Matt did his little wizardy thing where he sits up straight and he sits like this, and he just bloops and blorps and blops it out to where you've got that really sick syncopated drum groove. And then once the chorus hits, there's this crash that transitions from this programmed drum groove into a drum performance.
Whoa.
And that was really, really sick to watch because like that's something that I would not have done. Like I would not have been able to do what Matt did. And so it was a really rewarding experience for me to kind of take a step back with a record that was like extremely close to my chest, take a step back and realize, like we talked about earlier, being present with the song and realizing that what's best for the song is best for the song, and watching that unfold, seeing Matt do his thing and Matt playing, he crushed it, he really, really crushed it. And that's one of the highlights of the album.
Yo, sorry, lost
All
you there.
good. All good.
That was weird.
We're back.
Dope. All right, well, let's just keep on trucking before something else happens.
What's the last thing you heard?
The last thing I heard was that you wouldn't have done what he did, which was the sampling into the chorus where all of a sudden it's a drum performance.
Yeah, I would have not been able to do that. That session would have fallen apart if I would have been at the helm of it. So it was really cool to kind of, like we talked about, get the ego out of the way and realize, like, listen to the song and really be present and follow the nudge of, like, Matt should do this song. And then basically Matt comes in and knocks it out of the park for the band, and really creates one of the highlights on the record. In a way that, like, it would not have happened. That song would have been scrapped if I had ran that session.
That's so funny. And what a creative idea. I never would have thought of something like that. Do you remember how you guys did the guitars? Just the guitars are gnarly. They're just so crunchy, but not like too distorted. They just cut through so well.
Yeah, Matt likes to do a lot of. Matt loves crunch. That's his thing. So a lot of that is console distortion. Basically, we had a pad on Matt's console, but every time we would go to track something really gnarly, we'd just kind of cut that pad off, And so not only are the guitars overblown going into the console, the guitars are also, the console's distorting. So it just kind of sounds like it's breaking, which is a really signature thing that Matt does. He loves to do it with snares, and he does it with a lot of vocals, So I would say every guitar on that song is probably just recorded with a dynamic mic, probably a Electro Voice RE16. And then it's you got the crunch from the amp, and then you're slamming the console, and you compress that, and then all of a sudden, left, right, center, boom, you've got a rock and roll song.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to turn this light on.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's off. It's unplugged.
That's all good. It's not really any worries. Most people listen to it anyway.
Yeah, I'm softly fading into the background.
I know. I was been wondering. I'm like, it wasn't that dark when we started this.
The sun is setting.
Yeah, but that's amazing. Thank you for going into that. Opens new doors for me when I listen to that, knowing a little bit more about the process. And before we got the episode started, you were telling me that you do have your own project or projects that you've been working on that aren't quite released yet. So I would just love to know a little bit more about that. What made you want to start getting into this? What can you tell us?
Yeah, so for me, I got into music as a songwriter when I was really young. It was my focus for a long time, and then I quickly realized that I was just presented with a lot of different opportunities playing other people's songs. And I realized that I could advance my network and my experience level if I was a supporting musician, rather than trying to go out and grind my songs, which I'm so very glad for now, because the songs I was writing then, I'm glad don't exist for anyone to hear, And so I spent about a decade as a supporting musician, mainly. I would still write songs here and there, but that wasn't my primary focus. But in the more recent years, the past 2 years in particular, I've really whittled down a lot of my commitments as a touring musician and as a supporting member, because I really thrive as a songwriter. That is what I prefer. That's what I like to do the most. As an artist, I have a lot of songs that are existing in my brain and that I like to flesh them out. So that really started to work as I have two projects in particular that I'm the primary writer for. One is a hip hop project called the Church of Hip Hop, and then another one is it's more of a band. It's called Inner Being, and the Church of Hip Hop is a really big collaborative effort. It's a all expansive thing that, saying I'm the primary songwriter is actually a little ludicrous, because it's just a really creative process. I may bring an idea to start, but it might be a few loops or a few a hook or basic structure, and then what I like to do with that is take it to a band and take it to a recording process with producers and just let everyone write, just let no holds barred. And that is something that I really, really enjoy, is the co-creation and the co-writing aspect of that. To say, have a very informed demo of like, here's our vibe, here's a hook, here's a structure, but like, these are not parts, do whatever you want. And so I really, from that process of making hip hop records, which I've been doing since I was in high school, really led me to the process of making this record for the project Inner Being, which is the same concept, but a different, some are hip hop songs and Inner Being are, songwriter songs, singer-songwriter, kind of, you sing along. But basically for that project, I did the same thing as with the Church of Hip Hop, and just listening to the demos, I would envision who's perfect for the song in each, like kind of like you pick a baseball team or like a fantasy draft. I don't do any of the fantasy football stuff, but it's kind of like that for me, making records. Like I really like to think about each song, who's the right drummer, who's the right bass player, who's the right guitar player, and then you just get in the cut with the musicians, and I turn into my brain off, and I turn into the artist brain. I just become a performer, and I don't worry as a producer, because the people just do what they're there to do, which is slay. If you pick the right person for the role and you don't really tell them what to do, you just create an environment that's comfortable for them to be themselves, then you get magic, And so for those two projects in particular, that's why they've been really so fun for me, is because I get to focus on playing and writing, and I don't really have to think about producing. Like the songs just come out of that. You get the right people in the room, the right players on, third base and first base. You got the right people in the outfield, and, you've got, a World Series winning Atlanta Braves, you really can. Magic really, really happens when you just encourage people to be themselves. And I think that to me is the biggest part of those two projects, and why I'm so proud of how they're shaping up, is because it's less me and more the people that I really love to play with. That's why I got into music in the first place, is because I like being in the song, but I like watching people play, and I like watching people show out, and if you give people an opportunity to do that, they'll really knock your socks off,
Hell yeah. Hey, I'm excited to hear these projects, especially because it's kind of like a new side of you that you're exploring. I mean, it's not new because you've been writing songs for forever, but in a way you're returning back to this songwriting aspect after going through so many experiences as a producer and an engineer for other people. There's so many more lessons that you have in your back pocket now that you can use while creating. And it's such a nice thing to be able to take the back seat because you can trust the people that you're working with.
Exactly. I think that's one of my favorite things about how this point that I'm at in my career as a musician and a writer is I've spent over a decade kind of creating a Rolodex of like all-star team, and the people that I'm have the pleasure of making records with, they are the people that I want to make records with. It's not like the best guy around town, it's literally like the best guy for the job, just so happens to be in Athens or Atlanta or, willing to come for the session, and I feel really fortunate about that because I don't have to settle. I literally can write a song, and form a vibe, but I don't have to think about it because while I'm writing the song, I'm thinking of the drummer. So I don't have to think of a drum groove. Like I play the drums a little bit, but not nearly as good as the people that I'm having on the record. So why would I try and tell them what to play? Like just find the song, match it with the drummer, match it with the bass player, and just get in and cut it, So for the Inner Being record's a little further along the recording process, and all of the songs have been tracked live, for that reason. You just get in there and you just let people do their thing, and you end up with a full performance of a song. And I think that was a big energy that I wanted to capture for this record was that, 70s big band in a room kind of sound, which comes from, 4 or 5 people being in a room playing at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I'm stoked to hear these projects. Do you know quite yet when they're going to come out, or are you still figuring that out?
The Church of Hip Hop record will probably be the end of next year, if not the beginning of 2024. That's going to be a pretty big undertaking. Like I said, there's a lot of different moving parts with that, a lot of different producers and writers, and that's more of a national thing where we'll be flying people in, and it's going to take a bit more effort to get that one. But the Inner Being record should be, I hope it'll be out by the end of, we'll start dropping singles sometime this year,
Nice.
and start letting songs roll out. And I'm really excited about that one in particular because I think at this point there are about 36 people with performance credits on the record.
Wow.
And it'll probably be close to like 36 people that have like recorded a part on this album, which to me is really cool because it's really humbling to see all these people that I respect so much see their name, attached to this thing that's very close to me.
That's very cool. That's such a cool concept to make it feel like more of a collection of people instead of just one mind. I mean, it literally is a hive mind.
Exactly. And that's even goes to kind of some of the post-record stuff. Once the record's done, some of the visual stuff, like I want the band photos to be photos of the 48 people that performed, so that
Yeah.
it started kind of as a solo record because I've co-written a couple of the songs on the record, but mostly they started with myself. And so when I started recording the record, it was going to be a solo project, but it quickly, like, it's not a solo record. Like it's not even a band. It's like a cult almost at this point, so that's kind of really going forward into the rollout. That's really kind of how I want to push it, is like, this sound that's happening is a representation and a snapshot of what's happening in the Southeast right now, which is like, Athens in particular, like, it's off the chain, dude. It is like so many badass people making so many badass records that it's like, it feels like the center of the universe, So it's really cool to take literally all of those people, put them in a bottle and shake them up and be like, here's what you get,
Whoa, that's a really cool way of putting it. Well, I'm stoked. That's going to take us over to the last 5, where I'm just going to ask you 5 quick questions and then we'll be done.
All right.
All right, number 1, I think I know the answer to this. In the studio or playing live?
In the studio.
Yeah, I could have bet $1 million on that one. Question number 2 is, what do you think is a perfect album front to back?
In Rainbows by Radiohead.
God, I love it. I love it.
That's probably that and To Pimp a Butterfly.
Okay, yeah. I can't argue with either of those, especially because In Rainbows is my personal favorite. The last person I interviewed was Matt Martin, and he said the same thing.
Yeah, it's definitely, if you listen to any song I've ever recorded or played a part on, you can hear some influence from that record. I can point to you exactly something that I have stolen from Radiohead pretty much in everything I've ever done.
I love that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Question number 3 is, who is your dream artist or producer to work with?
My dream artist to work with is Kendrick Lamar, for sure.
Wow.
100%. Like, I have my eyes set on Kendrick.
That's crazy.
There's like this, like, I visualize it. I have dreams about meeting Kendrick Lamar and working with him. I saw him play at the amphitheater in Atlanta, the Verizon amphitheater, with like 20,000 people, and I felt like I was the only girl at the ball. I felt like he was there, that I was witnessing, just greatness. So definitely dream artist to work with is Kendrick Lamar, and dream producer would be Dr. Dre, for sure.
Wow. I had no idea you were such a hip-hop guy.
That's my favorite stuff, man.
Wow. Very cool. I mean, everything I've I've heard. All the music you sent to me was very indie rock. So
Yes.
that's so interesting that you have such a strong dichotomy, and I'm sure they influence each other in, conscious and subconscious ways.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been kind of um, that's been the fence I've straddled my whole life, is like I do a lot of guitar rock, a lot of indie rock, a lot of, psychedelic music, right? But then there's this dark side, this secret side of me that was an 9 and 10-year-old angry kid who found the Marshall Mathers LP on LimeWire and like changed my life. Within the same 2-year period, I downloaded the Marshall Mathers LP, which Dr. Dre produced, and that turned me on to the West Coast hip hop thing. And then 2 years later, In Rainbows came out, and they put it up for free, and there I'm like a 13, 14-year-old kid, and I hear Radiohead for the first time, and I was just like, that ever since has been the devil and the angel on my shoulder have definitely been those two influences in particular.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love that. And that's cool you were 13 when In Rainbows came out, because I was probably 11 and I didn't really like pick the music I listened to. It was kind of just whatever my parents listened to. So I wish I could have gone back in time and be more like aware of the musical landscape when that happened, because I feel like that was such a monumental moment in music history for one of the biggest bands ever to release their album for free. And that kind of like, you could probably say that Spotify and stuff like that is almost a direct correlation, or at least it's somewhere in the conversation, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely changed this 13-year-old's life. The trajectory of what I considered music was, I remember downloading it off their website, putting it into iTunes, putting it on my iPod video, and going upstairs and putting in my headphones and playing that record from start to finish, and just my world was ripped apart. I was just like put on a whole new path of like, that's what I'm chasing. Like I don't know if I'll ever get there, but I want to be in the cut of a song like Body Snatchers or Weird Fishes. You know what I mean? Like I want to be able to close my eyes and remember being in the room when something like that was recorded.
Wow, that's amazing. Question number 4 is going to be, what's on your musical rotation right now?
I've been listening to a lot of jazz music. I've been listening to 2 artists in particular. One's name is Brandee Younger. That's Brandee Younger. And she's a harpist, and she's just phenomenal. Like, she's just ridiculous. And another artist that is like, I keep going back to this record, his name's Robert Glasper, and he has a record called In My Element, and it's just mind-blowing. Like, really, really cool drumming, really, like, Robert Glasper is a phenomenal piano player. Been listening to John Batiste. As always, I listen to Kendrick at least 3 times a week. Radiohead, probably the same. And I've been really, really liking the stuff that Big Thief has been putting out.
Yeah, that new album's
really
great.
Sick. Yeah, they're ridiculous. I believe they did that entire record with Sean Everett, who's a phenomenal engineer producer. He did like Adele and a lot of like big pop stuff. But yeah, I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, that he did that whole record.
Crazy. It's amazing that they have 24 songs on that album, and I don't think one of them seems like a dud at all.
Yeah, Adrian Linker is one of the best songwriters like alive right now.
Yeah,
sure.
One of my best friends swears like on God that she is the best songwriter alive right now.
I can see it.
I've really only listened to her solo album that came out a year or 2 ago, and then this new Big Thief. I haven't really listened to any of the other stuff.
Yeah, I would take a look at the record Capacity, I think is the name of it. It's their second record that came out. It's got some really, really good songwriting. But definitely they have leveled up the production on this. Like that song "Time Slipping" is just starts out with those like bodily sounds and like cans, and they turn into this like loop that turns into like it's wild, dude. Like Adrian Linker is the real deal.
Yeah, I think the song I really love, it was one of their singles. I think it's called Little Things, maybe. I gotta look it up because
I'm terrible with song names.
yeah, it was one of the singles, so that's how I remember it. Yeah, it's called Little Things, and it's like very shoegazy. I was not expecting that from them because my whole idea, or what I thought they were for a long time, was way more folky, which they definitely have some of that. But I thought I was like blown away when I heard that, because it just feels like you're in the middle of this tornado that doesn't let up for 4 minutes. It's sick.
Yeah. And the way that she delivers melody and vocal is ridiculous. I saw them play on the Capacity tour at the 40 Watt in Athens, and
oh, cool.
I mean, I cried the whole time. Like I was just so wrapped up in her and the band and the songs, you know. And there was one point where she started to play a song, and the 40 Watt it's my favorite venue in town. But it is the worst to play as a band because notoriously the crowd is so loud. They just don't shut up. Athens is bad for that in general. Like they talk a lot during shows. But the 40 Watt in particular, the way it's laid out, I don't know what's about it, but the crowd is very loud and chatter, not screaming, not the fun part, but the annoying part. And so she's playing the song, and it's just her, and she stops the song. She hushes the crowd, and she said, "This song is really, really hard for me to play and get through. And if you don't stop talking, we're just going to skip it." And the whole crowd just shut up.
That's amazing.
And I've seen, so many dozens and dozens of shows at the 40 Watt, and she just took the crowd and sucked them up and shut them up and politely was like, "If you want to hear this song, you're going to be quiet," which was really cool.
Whoa, that's awesome. I just saw Alex G at the 40 Watt, and I kind of see what you mean. Like I enjoyed it a lot. It's the only show I've been to there, but the layout is kind of interesting. Like it kind of gives people this ability to be able to just look, and talk to everybody around, because it's not so tight where you're like super close to the artist, unless you really went for that front row spot. But I see what you mean, and that maybe part of it is the acoustics. I don't know, but it was a fun show to see, and I really like that venue, but I never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's kind of notorious around town for that. But like I said, it's my favorite venue in town. There's so much history there. The green room has all these signatures, and you got everyone in there.
Yeah.
From the Jesus Lizard to Kurt Cobain.
Whoa.
That have played there, and actually, Matt and Taylor, I think, saw Interpol play there.
Oh wow.
Which is kind of crazy. I have a couple friends that saw the Strokes play there. Just like everyone who's anybody has come through town and plays the 40 Watt. So it's legendary.
Yeah, historical. The last question I have here is one that we could probably talk about forever. I don't know how many of the fans will give a shit, but I love In Rainbows so much, and my friend asked me a really difficult question on his podcast. And it was all about my favorite album, and it was also a drinking game, which was funny, or like a drinking podcast. And one of the questions he asked me about the album was if I had to pick one song that wasn't on the album, that never existed, which one would I pick to go? So that's what I'm going to ask you right now.
Oh, man. To delete off of
like it's
existence?
Gone. Yeah, like it's gone.
Oh, dude. That's a hard question, man.
It is, yep. This is the only album I can think of and that I have equal amount of love for every song.
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer that question, if gun to my head, you have to delete a song off of In Rainbows, I'm just going to tell you to pull the trigger, because I cannot fathom, like, that record is just perfect,
Mm-hmm.
So there's really not one that I just am cycling through the record in my head, hitting next, 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 and it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I said, and he was shocked, and I also was kind of shocked. But I said Reckoner. I know.
Those drums, though?
I know. I mean, the drums are amazing, but it was either that or it was Faust Arp, and I was thinking, I should have said Faust Arp. I should have said it. And then I listened to the whole thing again the other day. I'm like, but it blooms. Like, it blooms so perfectly, that song.
It really does.
To me, I think Reckoner is just, maybe I feel like Weird Fishes kind of hits that nail on the head for me that the Reckoner does. Like, they're similar. I mean, look, they're all amazing. I feel bad just even saying it. But
what if I turn the camera and Tom York and Johnny Greenwood are in my bedroom?
They'd be like, "What'd you say, bloke?" Oh man.
Yeah. On that note, no pun intended.
Hey.
Weird Fishes is definitely probably one of my favorite recorded song of all time. Like,
yeah.
The triplet guitar, how it's in the left side and then the harmony comes in on the right side, like that had defined me as a guitar player more than any other recorded piece of music, I think.
Wow.
Really, like, I mean, I could send you 12 songs right now where I ripped that thing off. And every single time that I do it in a situation, it really fits the song and the whole band's like, so it's pretty, that record, we could have a whole podcast just about that record.
Mm-hmm, pretty much, yeah. Nigel Godrich is, I think, one of the best producers of all time, if anything, just for that album. But also,
absolutely,
I'm a huge Kid A fan as well.
Yeah, Kid A, I mean, anything Nigel Godrich does is ridiculous. Do you know he was supposed to do Room on Fire for the Strokes?
No way.
Yeah, so he started that record with the Strokes, and Julian has a guitar. His guitar teacher is kind of around, it's kind of like his guitar guru. Is I don't know, he's just not in the band, but he's around all the sessions. But he was apparently trying to tell Nigel Godrich how to record the guitars.
Man.
And so in the middle of the process, Nigel Godrich quit the record. He was like, I don't want to fucking deal with this, and
wow.
And the peak, and that's the peak of the Strokes being the biggest rock band alive, at that time.
Right.
So who can imagine that guitar guru was probably the least annoying person in the process, but so he quit, he quit, which is insane to quit a record like that then, took over the world in such a big way. But that's a little fun fact about Nigel Godrich.
I had no idea. And I mean, that takes a lot of balls. But he was with, doing OK Computer and Kid A and I guess Kid A was probably around the same time. But still, that's a couple of pretty amazing records, and he probably did some others that I don't immediately know. But
if you're working on Kid A, and you're just communicating with extraterrestrials and turning it into music, and then you've got somebody's guitar teacher being like, you should move the mic like this.
Right.
I'd probably be like, I'm going back on the spaceship, dude.
Yeah, take me back.
Yeah.
That's wild. I didn't know for a long time that he produced a Paul McCartney album.
That's crazy.
Yeah, have you heard it?
Mm-mm.
It's called Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. It came out 2005. I found out from interviewing somebody on this show that who also said In Rainbows was a perfect album front to back. He said that he also loved the one he did with Paul McCartney, and I was like, what? He's like, oh yeah, they did one. You should check it out. So I gotta say,
Chaos in the Backyard.
Chaos and Creation in the Backyard.
Okay,
so
I'll check that out.
Yeah, it came out 2005. I mean, it's sick. It's a Paul McCartney in the 2000s record, so it's not you're going to discover this new Beatles album, but there are some really great songs on there.
That's really cool. There's another crazy Nigel Godrich situation that Jason actually told me about. He got a call from one of his friends that was working at Sonic Ranch at the time out in Texas, and they needed this specific tape machine, right, that they couldn't find anywhere. And so they called Jason up, and they're like, where's this, do you know anywhere to get this tape machine, right? And he's like, okay, I think actually I know someone that has one. So he calls Andre 3000's engineer, and it was like, hey, do you still have that blah, blah, blah tape machine in storage? And so they did, and so Jason arranges for this like, $20,000-$30,000 tape machine to go from Atlanta out to Texas, from Andre 3000's personal collection. And he was like, okay, so I did you the favor, now like tell me what's going on. Well, apparently Nigel Godrich was at Sonic Ranch doing something for the Arctic Monkeys.
Whoa.
And basically needed that specific tape machine. So that's a pretty crazy, and I'm looking at Jason, we're sitting at his studio in Athens. I'm looking at him dude, who are you? What is this story? And, it's just kind of one of those moments that harkens back to what we were talking about earlier of things like that happen, and you realize that just how close you are to your heroes, just how small the world is. And if you keep going, that's really, the only thing that'll stop you from succeeding, or whatever that even means, is giving up. A very good friend of mine, my collaborator in the Church of Hip Hop, his name's Savon Springer. He's got some music out that will just blow your mind. So you should check him out. SAE_VON Springer. He told me that success is defined as getting more opportunities to do what you want. And so that's really helped me shape what that word means. But the only person that determines how successful you are is you. And the only thing that makes you stop getting opportunities to do what you want is not believing in yourself and not doing it,
That's very well said, and I think a very beautiful note to end this lovely interview on. Alec Stanley, thank you for joining me for an episode of On That Note. It's been a pleasure getting to discuss your recording process techniques, your philosophy on engineering and producing, and just on life in general, and just shooting the shit with talking about Radiohead is always a personal favorite for me. So thank you again for coming on the show, dude. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate this, and I'll see you around.
Sounds good, dude. I'll see you around. Maybe we can link up in Athens next time I'm in.
You got my number. Hit me up.
All right, dude. Sounds good. I'll talk to you later.
See you later.
See ya. Bye. Thank you again for joining me for another episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. If you haven't yet, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, and you can even leave a comment down below to let me know who you're listening to. On that note, I'll see you guys next time.
Christens my crown. Open up, say